All right, section on GDP pitfalls. The big thing that you have to remember from this section here is that what is being mentioned as things that should be added or removed from GDP is not things that should be added or removed from GDP when you calculate GDP. It's things that should be added or removed from GDP if you were to use GDP as a measure of well-being. Because the thing that you have to keep in mind is if you're a politician or you're in the government, you have things that you want to aspire to. So if you were like a very nice person and you wanted the best from your citizens, there's things that you would want them to get more of. So if you think just from a consumption standpoint, if normally your citizens could afford one car per household, well now if they can have 2 cars per household or 3 cars per household, they're able to have more. So typically having more goods makes you happier. But that's just a small part of what's important for society. So GDP is great at measuring gross domestic product, total value of goods and services produced. But this sequence of slides will look at essentially what would be the case if we'd want to use GDP as a measure of welfare. There's certain things that we'd want to add and certain things that we'd want to remove. Okay, so let's look at some of the things we'd want to add. Well, if we were to use it as a measure of well-being, we'd want to record unrecorded transactions. So all those transactions we were talking about earlier about like a mother producing food at home versus buying, well, those things should be added because they're actually contributing to society, but they're not taken into account because they're not normally recorded. So those things should be added. Peace, the whole idea of just being in harmony with one another, not having too much crime, is a benefit to society. So, but that naturally is not recorded. It's not a good that's being purchased. Preservation of natural resources, parks, clean water, no disease or bugs or anything else in lakes and rivers. Sustainable agriculture, not using dangerous pollutants, pesticides and stuff like that causes cancer. All those things relate and lead to a certain level of quality of life. Leisure time, death rates of kids, education rates, literacy rates, life expectancy and other things like that have value. What shouldn't be recorded is different things that lead to environmental damage. Because right now, an oil spill will lead to an increase in GDP because there's going to be a lot of people hired to clean up this mess. And essentially, yes, it's good for the economy and a GDP standpoint, or going to war is also good for the economy from a GDP standpoint, but it's not something that makes people happy. Poverty, unequal distribution of income is not good. People getting killed, different high crime rates and other things like that are not something that's good. So it's things that GDP doesn't really take into account. So what are some supplementary methods? Well, if we think of unrecorded activities, we could use time use surveys, but there's other qualitative indicators for environment and human welfare. So here's just an example of one with the Human Development Index, but here we're not going through all the columns, but you'll see a lot of these indexes that essentially go through like life expectancy, quality of environment and other things like that, and set the score for different countries. So this could actually be from a development standpoint or from a growth standpoint what a government should aspire towards. We should aspire to not only having more real GDP per person, but having a higher life expectancy and different things like that. So essentially, if you think, well, some people when they hear of macro that are more like in alternative fields that focus more on the environment and stuff like that, they think it's terrible that we're always focusing on growth. And I agree with that. Like, I'm an environmental economist, and I'd really want the environment and other things like that to be taken into account. So my environmental economics class, I talk about like the value of keeping a park as a park and not exploiting it, because when you take all the natural resources away, yeah, you can contribute to GDP, but you're leaving less clean environment for future generations, and that really has to be taken into account. So if you're interested in stuff like that, like definitely go look at all these alternative index and look at development type economics, and you'll be happy in that standpoint. So for now in this class, we're focusing on GDP because it's a clear measure of aggregate performance, but there's other stuff being done in economics that you might be interested in.